You are buying oranges at a roadside stand outside Hermosillo. When the van pulls up, this is a detail you will return to later. Not the van, not the men, but the oranges. You have been debating between two bags, one slightly larger, one slightly cheaper, and you have been holding both of them in your hands trying to decide. And the decision you never made will sit in your memory with strange weight for a very long time, because it is the last moment you can locate in which the mechanics of your ordinary life were still fully operational. The choice between two bags of oranges is the last problem you were permitted to solve on your own terms. You are a civil engineer from Guadalajara, 43 years old. You are in Hermosillo for a government contract review, a bridge rehabilitation project along Federal Highway 16, and you drove yourself in the hotel because the morning was clear and you wanted coffee and fruit before the 9 o'clock meeting, which is a kind of minor autonomous decision that fills an ordinary life and that you have made 10,000 times without consequence. You will reconstruct this chain later, obsessively, looking for the decision you could have made differently, the turn you should not have taken, the hotel you should not have left. You will not find it. There was no error. You were simply in a place at a time, and the place and time intersected with something that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with what you represent, which is a number, a specific research number. A number someone wrote down after examining your government contracts, your employer, your family's address in the neighborhood of Guadalajara, that communicates. To the people who research such things, a level of financial stability that makes you worth the effort. The men who take your professional in the narrow sense that they are not frantic. There are 4 of them. The van is an ordinary white delivery vehicle that has no markings because the absence of markings is its own kind of marking in this context. One man moves the orange seller 20 feet away with a hand on his shoulder and a word you don't hear. 2 men are beside you before you have fully registered the van's arrival, and the 4th is at the van's side door, which is already open. The transition from standing at the fruit stand to being inside the van takes less time than it would take to describe it. A hood goes over your head. Your hands are secured in front of you. The van moves. You do not scream. This surprises you later. In the moment, it does not feel like courage or composure. It feels like the temporary failure of a system that hasn't yet received the full signal of what is happening. Your body is moving through the motions of compliance before your mind is finished processing the situation, which is, you will eventually understand, exactly what the efficiency of the operation is designed to produce. Professionals in this specific field of work have refined the mechanics of abduction to minimize the window in which a target can react, because reaction, noise, resistance, flight, creates exposure, and exposure creates complications. They have closed the window before you could reach it. The drive is long. You count in your head because counting is something to do, because the mind in a crisis seeks any task that resembles control, and counting the second to drive while hooded in a moving vehicle is not control, but it is the shape of control, and the shape is enough to keep the panic at a manageable frequency rather than the overwhelming one that lives just beneath your sternum, and that you can feel vibrating there like a second heartbeat throughout the drive. You count to somewhere past 4,000 before the van stops, which means more than an hour, which means you are far from Hermosillo, in a direction you cannot determine. When the hood comes off, you are in a room. Concrete block walls, a single window high up, and covered with something that admits light, but not view, a cot, a bucket, a plastic bottle of water. The room tells you things you immediately begin reading. The bucket means they are not planning to move you frequently. The water means they intend to keep you functional. The window placement means this is a purpose-built or purpose-modified room, not an improvised location, which means the operation that brought you here is planned over a period of time that required construction or renovation, which means you are not the first person to occupy this room. You are an engineer. You read structures. This structure tells you that you are in a location maintained specifically for this purpose, which is information you cannot yet determine how to use, but that you file with the care of someone who understands that information in constrained environments is the only resource available. A man comes in an hour after you arrive. He is not large and not small. He has a demeanor of someone conducting a process rather than an event. Unhurried, organized, not unkind in a way that is distinct from kind. He tells you that your family has been contacted. He tells you a number. He tells you that you will be permitted to speak to your wife in 24 hours if the initial response from your family is cooperative. He tells you that cooperative means acknowledging receipt and beginning the process of arranging what is being asked for, and that uncooperative means a set of escalations he describes in the same tone he's used for everything else, which is the most frightening thing about the conversation. Not the content, but the register, the complete absence of personal investment in which outcome you choose, as though the outcomes are equally acceptable to him, and the choice is genuinely yours. He leaves. You sit on the cot. You begin the process of deciding who you're going to be in this room. This is a real decision, not a metaphorical one. You understand this with clarity that surprises you, the way extreme circumstances sometimes produce extreme lucidity in the moments between the panic pulses. The person you are when no one is watching, when you are in your car alone or working through a problem at 2 a.m, is the person you actually are, and the person you are in this room, under these conditions, will be built from that material and no other. You cannot perform your way to a better outcome here. These men have read people under duress before. They will read you accurately. So the only viable strategy is to be, as precisely as possible, what you actually are: a middle-aged civil engineer who is afraid and who wants to go home, and who is not a hero and does not intend to act like one. In the first 24 hours, you learn the room. You learn that the light through the covered window changes enough to track the rough time of day. You learn that there are at least 3 people in the structure based on the distinct patterns of footsteps you hear through the walls. One heavy and regular, one lighter and irregular, one that you hear rarely and only at night. You learn that the walls are not well insulated for sound, which means conversation is possible at volume you can monitor, which means the location is not being run with the operational sophistication of the transit or the delivery. It is being run with the minimal staffing of a facility whose primary security is its remoteness. You do not know yet what to do with this. You file it. You give yourself tasks. This is not a technique you read somewhere. It arises from the same instinct that made you count during the drive, the mind's requirement for work, for forward motion, for the feeling that time is being used rather than simply endured. You memorize the dimensions of the room by pacing it. You calculate its volume. You estimate the thickness of the concrete block by the sound it produces when you press your palm against it and tap. A child's technique, but accurate enough to tell you the walls are standard 8-inch block rather than reinforced, which tells you something about the cost of construction, and therefore something about the financial scale of the operation running it. You are aware that this information is practically useless. You accumulate it anyway because the accumulation is the point. On the 4th day, they bring another person into the adjacent room. You know this because the footstep patterns change, and because you hear through the wall the specific quality of silence that a person produces when they're trying not to make any sound at all, which is different from an empty room silence in a way that is almost impossible to articulate but completely unmistakable. You do not try to make contact. Not yet. Contact creates risk for both of you if it is discovered, and trust between strangers in adjacent rooms cannot be established quickly enough to be worth that risk in the early days. You note the presence. You wait. The man with the unhurried manner comes every day, sometimes twice. He brings food, always adequate, never more. The calibration of a person managing a variable rather than expressing a feeling. He gives you limited information about the negotiation in the form of status updates that tell you the process is moving without telling you where it is in process. And you understand this is intentional, keeping you invested in cooperation without giving you enough information to assess whether cooperation is actually serving your interests. You understand the technique. Understanding it does not make it less effective. On the 7th day, you make a decision that you deliberate on for 6 hours before acting on. You ask the man with the unhurried manner question, not about the negotiation, not about your release. You ask about the structure you are in, whether the water infiltration visible in the lower left corner of your room is a persistent problem or seasonal, because the efflorescence pattern on the block suggests a recurring moisture source, and if it's a foundation drainage issue, it will continue to degrade the block integrity over time. You say this in the tone of someone who cannot help noticing structural problems, because noticing structural problems is what they do. The man looks at you for a moment. Then he says he doesn't know. Then he asks what you would do about it. You tell him. You describe the drainage intervention clearly and briefly, the way you would describe it to a client. Not condescending, not performing expertise, just answering the question that was asked. He listens. He nods once. He leaves. You do not know what you accomplished. You know that you established, in a small way, a register of interaction that is not captor and captive, but is briefly, partially, two people discussing a problem that both of them can evaluate. You know that humanization in this context is not manipulation. It is survival, and the line between the two is thin enough that you have stopped trying to locate it precisely and are focused instead on the outcome. He comes back the next day with a question about a crack in the exterior wall he has apparently gone and looked at. You answer it. This continues for 3 days, a strange peripheral conversation about the building that is running alongside the central transaction that controls your fate. You are not naive about what this is and what it can and cannot do. You do not believe that a professional who manages kidnappings as a business will release you ahead of a resolved negotiation because he found your structural observations useful. What you believe is that the texture of the days matters, that the way time passes in this room has consequences for who you are when you leave it, if you leave it, and that being the person who knows things and shares them plainly, rather than the person who is only their own fear, is the version of yourself that will come out of this with the most intact. The person in the adjacent room coughs on the 9th day, a real cough, unguarded, the kind that happens when the discipline of silence momentarily fails. You tap twice on the shared wall, low, near the floor, at the rhythm of a settling structure. It could be anything. You wait. 20 minutes later, near the floor on the other side, 2 taps in return. You do not know who is there. You do not know anything about their situation. What you know is that the room is no longer entirely isolated, that there is, through 8 inches of concrete block, another person maintaining themselves through the same hours you are maintaining yourself through. And the knowing of this is not a plan and not an escape and not a resolution to anything, but it changes the air in the room in a way you feel physically, a slight shift in the way of the silence. And you put your back against the shared wall, and you sit there for a while, and you let it matter. The negotiation resolves on the 14th day. You are told this not by the man with the unhurried manner, but by a different man you have not seen before, who comes in the afternoon and tells you without preamble that transport is being arranged and that you will be released within 24 hours. You do not feel what you expect to feel, which would be uncomplicated relief. You feel instead a complex thing that takes you several days after release to even begin to name, something like the exhaustion of a structure that has been load-bearing under extreme conditions and is held but is now, with the load removed, able to register the full cost of the holding. They move you in the same van with the same hood, and they leave you on a road outside a town you don't immediately recognize, and you stay on the road for a moment in the afternoon light, and you exist, which is the only thing you are doing and the only thing that is required of you, and it is enough, it is more than enough, it is everything. Your wife is there within 40 minutes. She does not say anything for a long time. Neither do you. You have in 14 days learned to be very precise about when words are right instrument and when they are not. And this is not a moment for words. This is a moment for the particular knowledge that the person you love is in your specific location, and that no one is managing the distance between you. You let this be what it is. You do not try to contain or explain it. You have become, in a small room with concrete block walls and a high cover window, slightly better at letting things be what they are, which is not the lesson you would have chosen, but which is, you are beginning to understand, the one you're going to carry. The debriefing with the federal police happens over 2 days. You tell them everything you observed, the dimensions, the footstep patterns, the direction of the drive, as best you could estimate it. The water infiltration in the lower corner that tells you something about the topography of the site, the crack in the exterior wall that the man asked you about, the quality of the light at different hours. You tell them about the person in the adjacent room, the 2 taps, the shared wall. You give them everything your engineer's mind cataloged over 14 days of having nothing to do but observe. Whether any of it leads anywhere, you are not told. You suspect some of it will. You do not know if that changes anything about the transaction you were at the center of, the number written down by someone who looked at your government contracts and your neighborhood and saw a variable rather than a person. What you know is that you saw the room. You know its dimensions, its drainage problems, its sound transmission characteristics, and the rhythm of the footsteps in the walls. You know the cadence of a man who manages abductions with professional detachment and who found, in a structural conversation about moisture infiltration, a brief register that was almost human. You know the sound of 2 taps through 8 inches of concrete, and what they meant, which was less than everything and more than nothing, which in that room was a full available range. You are home. You are sitting at your kitchen table, and your wife is making coffee, and the light in the kitchen is a light you have looked at for 11 years without looking at it, and you are looking at it now. And outside the window, your neighborhood exists with the ordinary completeness of a place that does not know it was ever in question, and you let it be ordinary. You let it be unremarkable. You let it be the most sufficient thing in the world. The oranges are still there somewhere in the accounting of the day. An unresolved choice left on a roadside stand outside Hermosillo. You have decided not to resolve it. Some decisions, you now understand, do not need to be made. Some of them simply remain where you left them, open, holding the shape of a life that was briefly suspended, and that is now, with effort and time and the accumulation of ordinary mornings, being carefully, deliberately resumed.